Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. We are a small but mighty group, and lots of pizza, and nice to see some many familiar faces. For our lunch and learn today, I'm pleased to introduce Ms. Shellie, also known as Rochanne Vincent. She is a doctoral student here at the school. She's teaching a groups class, but for this presentation, Shellie has had a private practice for many years. So she's going to share with you a little bit about her experience and expertise. And thank you, Shellie.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shellie Vincent. So a little bit about my background before I go into the presentation. For the past 5 years, I've co-owned and co-founded a practice in Pittsburgh. It's called Peace of Time Wellness. I run all of the mental health side of things, and my partner runs all of the bodywork side of things. So we are a mind and body wellness center. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what it's like to develop and own a private practice. There's lots of hair dye involved. No, I'm just kidding, sort of. Also, this was sold as an engaging presentation. I apologize if I'm not super engaging. So, but we'll do what we can. And I'm sorry, I'm saying it too. Okay. So I'm gonna just kind of give like an overview of starting a practice, the things that you need to consider, and what this looks like maybe ongoing, because there's a lot to consider when you're thinking about a private practice. So if you are considering going into a private practice, you need to start somewhere. And what I would say is don't just start practicing, because you'll probably wind up in a world of confusion and whoops, I shouldn't have done that, and now I owe money back. So really, where you want to start when you're considering a private practice is actually like planning in advance. I can tell you from, I know some colleagues of mine have started practices in different ways. I probably started planning the practice about a year in advance. It might have even been 2, because I know we were looking for a location for a good almost year before we found one. But the planning process started long before that, because there are so many considerations. One of the things that I advocate when anyone talks to me about wanting to start a practice, or if they're changing their practice from a solo to a group practice, which often happens, folks want to grow, have a business plan. A business plan is going to be very, very vital, because we have to remember that in private practice, it's a business. Yes, there are want to help and do many things, but there is a heavy business aspect to it. And so a lot of that I will be discussing in greater detail. So basically, the business plan is going to give you a structure. It's also going to help you see over the next few years how you want your practice to grow, like what you want to offer, what this could look like over time. And also each year it needs to be reviewed. So you're looking at, am I meeting these goals? Am I doing what I wanted to do with this business? Am I seeing growth? Am I not seeing growth, and why? So it also helps with like a problem solving process as you're moving through your cycle. The other thing you want to consider is the location of your practice. Some folks are very comfortable practicing in their home. Some folks are not. When you are starting a business, you do have to set a location. You have to set a location for the insurance companies, for your EIN, which I'll get into in a moment, for any certificate of organizations through the state or through whatever state you may be practicing in. They have some type of certificate of organization, which basically is saying, I am establishing this business, and this is the location of that business. It can change over time, but you really want to think when you're starting out what this looks like, because to change it later is a whole process. So the last bit, when you are considering to start a private practice, have a good lawyer who works in small business. Many lawyers are not mental health lawyers. You have the NASW as social workers that are a great legal resource. So anything mental health wise or practice wise, the NASW can help you with. Business wise, really, you need a good attorney who knows small business, who know the tax laws, who also understand how to form a business, how to form it accurately, any employment laws, 1099 contractor laws. If you want to grow at some point, that person's going to do your contracts, your agreements. So find a good lawyer and an accountant. If some folks will do their billing on their own. It does get to be overwhelming, and depending on what type of practice you're trying to grow or establish, you might need an accountant who will help you take out the taxes, because tax liability is high when you have a practice. That accountant will also can do your bookkeeping, can do your payroll, can do all sorts of things. So if you start out with these folks, they will grow with you and they will advise you on your growth, which is really, really helpful. So those are some considerations when you are even just starting out thinking about a private practice. Anyone overwhelmed? So once you move through it, it's the process. Well, I mean, there's always changes to it, but I mean, you grow white hair and just are like, well, it is what it is. But anyway, so starting out, is there a way to, I guess, move this around?
So just move it to the side or something. Should it go to the side with it? It'll
Should also just go away when you move away.
Okay, I'll move it around. Okay, so first thing when you are thinking about private practice is you need to decide on a business structure. There are multiple kinds of business structures. I would suggest utilizing any type of like small business organization or small business resources, or even just an attorney. They're going to tell you about the different types of liability that are involved with what kind of business you want to start or what kind of practice you want to start. There's what's called sole proprietorship, which is like a solo practice. LLC, which is more like a group practice. You could do that a couple of different ways, but just for general things, I'm going to call it a group practice, and you really do need to consult an attorney if you want to go any of these routes. There's an LLP, which is a partnership. There are a lot of considerations if you're going into it with a partner. Make sure like you and your partner are on the same page and will be for like the next 10 to 20 years with all of life's changes. There are many things to consider in a partnership, including equity in the business, selling your part of the business if you choose to transition. All of that comes with great costs, great consideration, and also can have some pretty negative consequences to the other partner who still wants to either maintain the business or who wants to leave. So some things to think about. Make sure that you can practice independently before you start. Many states are not allowing LSWs to practice independently. So if you begin a practice, you may not get credentialed through the insurance companies, or you might be found out of compliance and you'll be reported to the board, and then you are in jeopardy of many things. So make sure you can actually practice independently before you start a practice. The next step is business name approval. So when you're starting a practice, if you're not just like, it's just me, I'm going to do this solo practice and I'm a sole proprietor. Many states, so in Pennsylvania, we had to have approval from the board. I also had to have approval to have a partner working with me. That was not in social work. So you have to move through what's called name approval. Usually it starts with the board. Check with the state board first to make sure what their regulations are. And they're going to always point you to the code. It will tell you, you will be reading so much code. You will get to be fantastic at reading code and interpreting it in whatever way you see fit. And then you will be told by the board that maybe you need to think about it in 4 other ways. And then they'll point you back to the code. That's typically what happens. But check with the code. You may need to approve your name through the social work board. Then you have to check through the state registry. Every state has a business registry. There cannot be 2 businesses named the same thing in most states. You can double check. Other states may be different. The process I had to go through, we could not have the same name as another business. We also had what's called a fictitious name because the way we had to operate with 2 LLCs housed under a fictitious name, that gets very complicated. Do not worry about that. Consult an attorney if you want to do a fictitious name. So check the state. Then you obtain an EIN. It's actually very easy to obtain an EIN. Does anyone know what an EIN is? Oh, fantastic. It is your business tax ID through the IRS. So you obtain an EIN. And like I said, it's very easy, but the things that you need the name of your business and you also need the location. So both of those things have to be already determined before you go into your EIN. I will tell you, I know folks who have not done this and decided later on they wanted to be an LLC from a sole proprietorship. They had already established an EIN under their name, went to move into a group practice, and it has been pretty much mayhem trying to transition everything over. So like I said, business planning is really helpful so you can kind of get a structure. So then you move, after you have your name, location, you create the business through your state, through usually what's called the certificate of organizations. It might be named differently in different states, but that is basically your document to say, I have now this business and it is now established through the state. But you need your EIN to do that, you need your location, and you need the business name. All of those things need to happen first. Any questions so far? This has been a lot.
It's an NPI.
That is what we're getting to next. So your NPI is your National Provider Identification Number. Do any of you currently practice somewhere? Even in your field work, are you practicing? Okay. Do you bill for your services? Okay. So if you are billing, you already have an NPI. You most likely didn't know that, but somewhere in the recesses of the agency, they have applied through NEPS for your NPI. Anybody who is in the healthcare profession who is practicing has a National Provider's Identification Number, and it's really simple to apply to get an NPI. So most of us, since we have an individual, or if you go from your MSW, most likely community, like the next steps after your MSW is like community mental health or a clinic, you'll most likely get an NPI there. However, if you are establishing a group practice, you have to have what's called an organizational NPI or group NPI. So you have to go into NEPS, which is, don't ask me what that name is, but if you Google NPPES, it will pop up for you and you apply. And when you apply for your group NPI, you'll need all of the information of your practice, put it in the NPI, it generates this number for you, and it does what's called like group billing. So now you are a group entity that is a healthcare provider of behavioral health. So for insurance companies, you need this in order to bill. If you don't establish it and you bill solely and you try to move to group practice, it becomes a little dicey. So usually you want to credential under your group NPI as well as your individual NPI starting out, because it's just going to make your life a lot easier. Any questions about the NPI? Great. You guys can interrupt if you have questions too. All right, so I'm going to start talking about like the different types of considerations. There are many. So we're going to go through a few of them. Let me know if you have any questions. I will always throw out there for legal considerations, always consult an attorney, consult the NASW, document that you have consulted to. So if anything ever comes back, you're like, yeah, here are the people that I spoke with and here is what they said. Usually via email, as long as you have a record, you're pretty okay. So legal considerations, the structure of your practice and employment. Does anyone want to own a group practice someday? Maybe. I know you're all looking like, I don't know, after what you just told me, I don't think I ever want to own one. But if you do, there's a couple of considerations. You're looking at the structure, so all of the things we talked about with LLC. Then you want to think about, like, are you going to have employees at some point? Like, are you going to have other therapists that are going to be billing under your group practice, generating income for your practice? So you have to think about employment. State, the federal law, there's state law, and there's also local laws regarding employment, how much time somebody can work, who is an employee versus what is called an independent contractor. Do you all know what an independent contractor is? Basically, it's what's called a 1099. So that person is just somebody who provides services. You can't really tell them what to do, even though you might like be the owner of the practice. They just kind of come in, do their job and leave. You can't tell them when to work, things like that. All of which, like I said, somebody who is in the law profession can guide you on whether or not you need 1099 or you need what's called a W-2, W-9 or W-2 employee, W-4. Many names, just know there's contractors and employees. And if you are growing a business, you can have either, but there are limitations to each that are governed by the federal government, state government, and local government. That's the key takeaway there. So written contracts are going to be your best friend. They are going to provide you with, like, here is my expectation for this specific person, whether they're a contractor or whether they're an employee. And if they don't uphold those, there are termination laws. In every state, there are termination laws. Pennsylvania is an at-will termination state, like we can fire at will, but you better have good grounds for the termination or else you're going to be paying unemployment. So every state is different. And if you have an employee and you terminate them, you are obligated now to, if they file for unemployment, to either be liable for that or provide documentation that you are not liable for it. Independent contractors, you don't have to worry about that. You fire them, they're done. You're like, thanks for your time, but you still have to pay them for the services rendered, which sometimes take months to get the reimbursements in. Tax law. So the structure of your business has tax law implications. There are different types of corporations and partnerships that you can form under tax law. So it will have great implications on how much tax liability or basically like how much you have to pay the government every year. So you really want accountants and attorneys to like help you structure all of this. There are several taxes that no one is aware of until you actually own a business. Some of which are employment taxes, random business taxes that the IRS just sends you for occasionally and you're like, wow, oh, that's cool. Or sales tax. Why there is sales tax at a service-oriented business, I have no idea, but we definitely have had sales tax in the local municipality say, what about this tax? And we're like, we didn't know this. The other legal considerations, collections, your billing policy is going to have some pretty big implications on whether or not you can take somebody to collections. So if you're not consistent in your billing practice, you start to have a lot of room where someone can claim malpractice because your billing has not been consistent. So there are like these obligations that you also have here for billing. Malpractice claims do happen. One of the pieces of advice I was given when I owned the practice, which probably made me not sleep for 2 years, is you will get a malpractice claim at some point. It will happen. Here are the people you need to call. And I was like, so I slept with one eye open thinking, is tomorrow this day? So that was the piece of advice that I received. So just understand, like, this does happen. Make sure that you're documenting, make sure you have the people that you are consulting with, they will have your back, especially if you have been with them for a long time and you're practicing ethically. Make sure you also have malpractice insurance. The NASW offers malpractice insurance and it's reasonably priced until you start growing, and then you have to have general malpractice insurance because you are liable for your contractors and your employees. The owner now becomes responsible for any decision-making that they have. So you want it, over time, malpractice insurance can become a little bit more expensive, but as your business grows, it's really not that big of a deal. So, and here's my caveat that your business lawyer may not be able to guide you on specific mental health information, but the NASW can give you some guidance, but they will tell you where they can and cannot, and they will tell you when to consult your business attorney. The other thing to take away from this is you will have like a whole team of people that know everything about you and the decision-making process you move through that you never really wanted in your life, but you are so glad that they are there because in times of trouble, they will help you and they will know why you made the decisions that you made. All right, our next consideration, finances. So this one is fun. Most people don't realize how expensive it is to actually have an ongoing practice or like to maintain a practice. The first thing we have to think about is startup costs. Starting a business always has startup costs. Technology, getting your EHR set up, like hiring someone to do a website if you want to do a website, or if you want to do it by yourself, it takes a lot of time. I tried to do it by myself, it takes a lot of time. Also, I'm not that tech savvy, so I had to learn real quick what you do with a website. So all of these startup costs are like one-time costs that are going to happen and incur just so you can get yourself up and running. Any questions so far about startup costs? This is also like your computer. If you need a better camera, let me tell you, technology breaks constantly. Oh my goodness, it's amazing. It would behoove anyone to have like a tech person that you pay. There's also ongoing expenses and taxes. So operation always carries ongoing expenses. Keeping the lights on, maintaining your EHR. EHR does get more expensive the more people that you hire and the more clients that you have. Let's see, there's other operational expenses like paying an admin staff, because you have to think about if you are seeing 30 clients a week and you have client notes, documentation, phone calls, and that's going to take up X amount of hours, you still have people who are calling in to schedule new appointments and things like that. So whether or not you want to pay somebody to be an administrative staff, it is very helpful. I think after about month 8, I hired an administrative staff and was like, I'm good. Like, this person can handle the phone calls and calling insurance companies. You will also sit on the phone with insurance companies for so long. So other ongoing taxes, tax liability, it usually is greater in private practice. And also depending on how you grow, it also can become greater as well. So there are ongoing taxes, quarterly, some are like, I don't know, random, yearly. And there are always random fees and fines. So throughout the duration of a business, laws will change, taxation will change, and costs increase. I will also tell you what the insurance reimburses you. You only have every 2 years you can negotiate a new rate increase, but you can also be denied. So your raises are always through your reimbursement through the insurance if you're accepting insurance, or you're raising your fees. But there are stipulations on how long you have to notify clients if you're raising yourself, like your self-pay rate. There's the NASW goes through it. So the biggest consideration for finances and the takeaway is like looking at, are you actually going to be in the black or is your business going to stay in the red? Basically, the red means like you're not really profiting, like you're spending more on this business than you're bringing in. Staying in the black is a good thing. I mean, you want to be much above the black, so you don't want to be like $1 because that's going to be your profit from the business. So your hope is that like there's a lot in the black that you have and you're not always dipping in the red. Over time, you keep on dipping in the red, you're going to lose your business. So because then you're going to have to start taking out loans, there's all this other stuff. So this is all like the business kind of and the background tasks of owning a practice. In a business plan too, you usually have like a financial place where that you consider all of these things. You begin to consider like, what would my startup cost be? What are my ongoing things? So that is why also, again, a business plan can help, because you can also decide like, maybe I don't want to start my practice this year. Let me practice a little bit more, accrue some more capital, and then maybe start it next year when I have a little bit more money and I can maintain 3 months of practice without necessarily having great income. Insurance companies take anywhere from like 30 to 90 days for a reimbursement from a claim. Sometimes it could take longer if there's an issue with the claim. So you have to think about that too. You're gonna have like the ebbs and flows. So, all right, any questions? Yeah.
Do you have a sense of how many people use their own funds versus like a loan when they first get started?
So I think it's up, it depends. I know many of my colleagues started solo, practiced on their own first, but developed like a group practice. So like, and it's similar to the way that I developed. I knew that at some point I wanted to grow. So I initially started a group, but I was solo. I was the only practitioner within that group. And then after I was able to generate enough referrals, and I was overwhelmed and kind of inundated, that's when I sat back and kind of looked at what I needed to start growing. And I have 2 colleagues right now who have started a private practice maybe about 2 years ago, and are ready to start growing. So now they're looking at, do I have enough revenue that I'm coming in, enough referral stream that I can actually maintain having somebody under me? Yeah. You could, I mean, some people do take out loans. Most folks I know started solo under a group and then built that way. Just so that way you didn't go into, it's easier to not, I shouldn't say it's easier because I don't know it to be true. This is just my experience. You're not as quick to go into the red. Like you have enough control over what's happening in the income that you probably won't go in the red when you start hiring folks. Yeah. So my growth was me solo. I added an admin staff part-time. Then as I grew with therapists, my admin staff went up full-time. So yeah, and always stayed like just kind of balancing that finance. So you have folks who will help you with that. Like if you have an accountant doing your bookkeeping, they'll tell you, they'll be like, oh, or like they'll be like, yeah, I think you're safe, but make sure this is happening ongoing or else you're gonna dip. So yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. How your business is structured is going to influence the finances. So like I was saying, if you want to grow, you have to think about that growth, what it looks like financially. The other thing, in accepting insurance, that is a big one. Some practices are solely self-pay. There are some ethical things that the NASW is going to advise you on if you're only self-pay. You have to look at hardships. You have to look at like clients actually paying. That is another thing. And also giving room for what's called like a forgiveness or like a write-off. If you're talking to an accountant, it's called a write-off. If you're social worker, it's called financial forgiveness. So you have to think about those things if you're only going to be self-pay, because you will also be your biller for a while unless you hire someone out of the gate. So you do have to consider collections and having some of those difficult conversations with your clients like, hey, you owe like $500, like I may have to restrict how often I'm seeing you until we get this balance down, because otherwise now it's contributing more to your mental health and anxiety or whatever may be going on than actually helping you. So, and then you have to think about, like, if I give forgiveness to 4 people who may owe $3,000 a piece because they never paid their deductible and their self-pay, that's now $9,000 that I'm not bringing into the business, that I'm either not paying myself, or I'm not paying my staff, or I'm not paying my rent. So there are a lot of considerations if you're going to be a self-pay. Insurance is a joy. Anybody work with insurance companies? Any experiences with insurance companies worth sharing?
My personal one is that, like, sometimes when I wanted therapy, for my insurance company, that I was gonna pay a $25 copay. Like, back it was like $100 bill.
Yes. Yes. Any other experiences with insurance? Okay, go ahead. Whoever wants to talk.
I was just gonna say, I'm interning at a private practice, and a lot of the people who call interested in therapy have very high deductibles. So it's like $3,000 or $5,000. Like, how are they supposed to see anybody?
Right. And often too, even when you call in to check on like somebody's insurance, sometimes you get misinformation. So they'll tell you it's a $25 copay. Then when the claim comes back, it's $109 or whatever the reimbursement rate is. And you're like, well, sorry person, but you owe this. So considerations with insurance, you have to credential through each insurance company. It is a process. It can take up to a year to be credentialed with some insurance companies. If it is Medicare and Medicaid, it is a long process, and there are many things you have to consider, including fraud, waste, and abuse, which if you work in a clinic, I'm sure you have heard fraud, waste, and abuse. It is a big thing. There are ongoing quarterly trainings you have to do as an organization. So Medicare and Medicaid will take very, very long to credential with. The other insurance companies, depending on if the owner is already credentialed, it might be very easy because you could fall under the group, or it could take a process too. It could take up to, like, I think our longest right now is like 8 months, 6 to 8 months for one of the insurance companies that we credential with. So you have to think about all of these caveats. There are certain policies and regulations that the insurance companies are going to have, and each one is going to be different. So you have to check the updates. There are updates every month, the newsletters. I have my admin staff do that. I don't want to, so they do it and I pay them to. So you have to think about those things because there are, like, especially during COVID, that's how we were getting our information on how to bill. And if you didn't bill accurately, you weren't getting reimbursed, your claims were coming back, it was taking longer because there were modifiers now with COVID. So there's like a whole lot going on with insurance companies. The great thing about insurance companies though, is you will get more clients because most clients don't want to pay out of pocket. It's expensive. So if you do not want to accept insurance, you have to think about your fee for service. Are you going to have a sliding scale? For whom? What dictates a sliding scale? What dictates certain amounts in the sliding scale? You would talk, like, you talk to the NASW, they're going to give you their 2 cents. And then you have to talk to, like, your business person and they're going to give you their 2 cents, and you have to kind of figure that out. Then you have to think about, like, collections. Are you going to offer groups? What's the cost of the group? Are you going to run it through insurance? Sometimes it's really difficult to run a group through insurance. Sometimes it's not. Some insurances are like, yeah, no problem. This is just what you do. Other ones are like, oh, you have to bill independently, and it looks like this to do each claim. And then are you going to offer other services and workshops? What is that going to look like? How much is that going to cost? Who all's involved with that? So again, this is all part of the structure and what you want to think about. And then how often are each of these happening? How are you billing them? How is payment collected? Is it collected beforehand, afterwards? And what is the rate for each of these things? All of that's going to influence your income, your finances, and really, like, what you're looking at underlying what's called your profit and loss. And your accountant will talk about that. So you want to think about, how much is my practice actually generating? Can I actually pay myself this month? After I pay everything else, is there money for me? And that is your income for the year. So, or well, that month. All right, any thoughts about this? It's a lot going on. All right. Don't worry, it's not that bad, I promise. Really, like, again, I cannot stress enough to have, like, a really great accountant and attorney. They will help you with so much of this and help you make decisions. Yeah.
Do you find, like, I know you said to keep a like business attorney on retainer, but would you also keep a like attorney who's knowledgeable of like mental health laws on retainer?
You can really though, if you find a really great business attorney, they would be willing to coordinate with other folks. So like you could, because you can't, there will be issues like malpractice that your business attorney isn't going to know the caveat, like they're not going to know all of the law surrounding malpractice specifically for behavioral health. However, they would be willing to coordinate with other ones, knowing that your business is structured under, like you are providing behavioral health services. So it depends on the relationship you have with your attorney. If you're finding you don't like your attorney, number one, maybe consider having a different attorney. But number two, then you might want to think about, do I want a mental health, like somebody over here who's I'm consulting with on law? Yeah. Any other questions?
What suggestions do you have about how to find a good attorney?
Talk to people. Your accountant too, if you find a really great accountant, usually they're already working with a business attorney. They usually have like a few attorneys that they're going to suggest. One maybe for like individual tax law. If they're doing your individual taxes, usually they do, because just take everything, I don't care anymore. Like they usually have a business person too, they have a business attorney. And so they'll recommend, and what's great about that is they work together because they already have a relationship. So they're going to work together on like what you need for your business. So that would be my suggestion, is find a really great accountant. Great accountants can be found word of mouth. Or like if you're already working in a practice, you might even want to be like, oh, what accountants do you guys use? And kind of get some feelers out there. Many people, even who do not own a business, have an accountant anyway. So you could even just like ask folks who have an accountant who they use, who they would suggest that you, people that you trust, ask them, because they will be honest with you and they'll be like, yeah, I don't really like my accountant, so don't use them. But my friend has this one. So that would be my suggestion, is find people who work together. It literally becomes like a team. So I can call my lawyer and be like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And they'll be like, well, you need to call Joel, the accountant. And we're like, oh, okay. And he's like, I'll follow up with Joel later. Like, so it all works out. And then they come up with, here are things you need to think about and the potential consequences. So that would be my best advice. Sorry, I don't have more. But word of mouth is probably the best. Because, you know, when people are putting stuff out there, and we'll get to networking and marketing, actually here, whenever you're marketing, you know, you're putting your best foot forward and deleting those nasty Google one-star Google reviews. No, I'm kidding, you cannot delete those. The thing you want to think about with, so this is all networking and marketing. You are a bit like, once you own a practice, you are a business. So you begin to network, you begin to market, you have to let people know that you're there, or else you don't have a referral stream. Like you have no new business coming in, which your business will eventually decay and die. So you have to think about like, okay, this is a business, I need to make my business known. And there are a variety of ways that you do that. Social media is very heavy. So web presence, what's called SEO is like really big. So having a Google page, making sure you have a website that is appealing, that is easily navigated, things like that. You want to have that. Have a social media presence. The NASW is very specific though on social media and technology. So make sure you consult the NASW for social media. The other thing too is you want to generate relationships. So like networking opportunities, like when you can go to like, for example, like a lunch and learn and you talk to people, or you go to a conference and you talk to people. That is another way to generate who you are, like your networking and referral sources. You never know who you're going to meet. I had sent out flyers, so you can do flyers too. When I first started, I had sent out flyers and actually didn't realize that right across where where the practice was, there was a huge hub for a hospital and outpatient health services. And all they had was one behavioral specialist who couldn't accommodate all of their clients. So I just landed like a huge referral stream of, I mean, it was multiple clients a month at that point. So, so you never know who you're going to meet or who is going to actually take you up on like what you're putting out there. So don't be afraid to. I think this is really hard for some folks, is actually getting out there and networking, but it's probably the best thing that you can do. And again, I cannot stress enough, the NASW has guidelines on media. You cannot like put clinical advice on there. Like there are many things you cannot do because it is a huge liability for you. So, Any thoughts about networking and marketing? There's a lot going on. Okay, here are all of the profession things that you want to think about. This is a lot. We'll break it down so it's not as, and I apologize, it's really warm in here. Is everyone hot? Like, I know I really am too. It's like, it's very, very warm. On top of that, we're talking about like a stressful subject. So like the weight is just like heavier and hotter. Okay, so here's the professional considerations. I kind of broke it down into like, here are some things you think about when you are practicing, and these are like ongoing concerns. So these are things that you're thinking about like I wouldn't say all the time, like at some point, like you habituate to the fact that like all of these things are on the back burner. But they are things that you have to consider when you're making decisions when like, for example, I just had a therapist who emailed me about a situation with a minor. And so now you have to go through all of this and think about, well, here's what we have to do with that. So legal considerations, client matters. So like when a client presents to you and they're like, oh, my lawyer wants to talk to you. And you're like, well, so you have to think about that. You have to, because that's coordination of care and you may or may not be working in your client's best interest by talking to their lawyer. So you need to consult, things like that. Release of information, you have to have that form. Collegial matters. So when you are owning a practice, remember we are a profession full of ethics, and one of those ethics is our ethical obligation to the profession and to our colleagues. So if someone is practicing unethically, you have an obligation to follow the NASW's guidelines to that and kind of manage it. And especially if that colleague is working under you, because you now have liability for that. I have heard many stories from folks where they did not resolve an issue that kind of grew into an extremely unethical issue and their practice was in jeopardy of shutting down. What I usually do is I follow up immediately and nip it in the bud, and especially if it's a therapist practicing under me, and document it and then kind of put them on notice. Like if this happens again, here's what the consequences are going to be, which may result in termination, especially if it has to do with unethical behavior with a client. If you think about collections, there are a lot of legal guidelines when you are collecting. There has to be documentation and there has to be consistent practices with it. Fee for service, there are legal considerations that are given by the state board, like especially for supervision, there's like a maximum that you can charge. The NASW also has fee for service. There are also legal considerations if you're doing fee for service, consulting with your attorney to set those fees. They'll help you too with like state law and stuff like that. Any new regulations that come down, there are so many, and COVID has created many more. So there are always new regulations that are under consideration. Again, have people that will help you make that and those decisions and understand it. Insurance compliance. If we don't comply with insurance, like if somebody has a deductible, we're like, no, don't worry about it. It's actually, well, in the state of Pennsylvania, it might be different in other states. It's actually insurance fraud. If we continue to do that, at some point, compliance with our contract with the insurance company, and at some point we are in jeopardy of losing our credentialing, solo as well as the group if you are the owner. So ethical considerations. I'm sure you all are familiar with ethical considerations. Hopefully you all have talked about the NASW. So client services, our ethical standards, our ethical principles actually guide a lot of like what we're doing with our client services, the type of services we're providing, how often, things like that. It also guides our collegial relationships, how we respond to folks, how we manage conflict in the office, all of that. The NASW has ethical standards around. They also have ethical considerations for financial hardship and consistent billing practices. So on top of like the law stuff, you also have to look at the profession's ethics and how you are setting your fees, because there are also ethical fees for consideration for vulnerable populations. So a really great example of a new regulation was the good faith estimate that happened in 2022. Does anyone know the good faith estimate? It came from the No Surprises Act of 2022, saying that like healthcare company or healthcare providers can no longer just randomly send you a bill without notifying you like this is what you're most likely going to owe. And basically it's called good faith because we do the best that we can to say this is what somebody's going to owe, but it could change based on a multitude of reasons. So this is one of the examples. We had to implement it. I think we had 3 months to implement it. So we had to go back through all of our clients, have this document that the NASW gave us and fill out for everybody. The other thing is documentation and making sure that your documentation is within an ethical time frame. And also for claim submission, you have to substantiate diagnosis. So there are all of these kind of considerations ethically. Any questions so far on the first two columns? Great. I know this is a lot. Hopefully not deterring anyone from private practice, just broadening and widening the considerations for it. We do have practice standards. So if you ever look at the NASW, if you Google like clinical standards for the NASW, they literally have a whole book on clinical standards for the NASW that need to be taken into consideration. The other thing, I say this to a lot of my supervisees and also with like establishing their practice, specialize in something. You will do yourself a huge favor as a specialty provider than just being a general practitioner. Sure, you'll get other referrals, but I will tell you, our specialization is in trauma and attachment. And all of us are certified in multiple modalities for trauma treatment, attachment, and somatic work. So we all have certifications, and because of that, we are sought out by many facilities, including other mental health organizations for referral sources, as well as like training and workshops. So specializing is really, really great. But make sure you have like the certifications you're actually doing the training. Don't just say you specialize in something. That's not ethical and against our clinical standards. Technology requirements and standards. We have a whole book, the NASW has come out on technology standards. We also have HIPAA and the privacy policies that we all need to make sure that we are complying with. HIPAA is there is a breach in HIPAA, it is huge, like it is a really big deal. There's also clinical documentation standards for practice. Malpractice. It can happen in any of these areas. It can restrict your licensure. Also, it will restrict you from getting future malpractice insurance if you have had multiple malpractice suits against you. It can restrict your credentialing because when you go into credential, literally there is this huge page that you have to answer all of the questions to, and the same with your licensure. Like, have you ever had a suit brought against you? Has it been resolved? What did it look like? Then you have to provide documentation if that has ever happened. Also, you have to think about crisis situations. Who's going to answer crisis calls from your clients? If you're a solo practitioner, they're going to follow you. And malpractice suits can arise from not tending to those. All right. The NASW and the state board will also have a ton of information on this. Billing and credentialing or ethical billing practices. The biggest thing here, have really great office policies. Anytime you go into a facility, a healthcare facility, you're going to have healthcare policies. You know those, you all have like the yearly forms that they will tell you, you have to sign this when you go into like your doctor. Man, those are the policies. Those are your HIPAA policies and your privacy policies, period. So you want to make sure that your office has privacy policies because it's going to, or has all of your office policies on there because it will be expectations for the clients as well as it's a contract. So if somebody is not doing those things, you pull out your office policies and have a very forward conversation about it. Compliance with the insurance company's policies, they all have policies. And then you have to put through the claims and stuff like that. And there's policies around that too. And if not, then you move to audits. Like if all of this is not kosher, then you get audited. There are random audits that like just happen through some insurance companies. It's for their compliance. So those happen. Just make sure your paperwork is pretty good. And paperwork should be clear, transparent, and reflective of what you're doing. If you're just writing like 2 sentences on your notes, like you'll most likely get audited again. And if you continue to get audited, like it's probably not a good thing. So you need to make sure that you're supporting the diagnosis and services rendered for any insurance companies and compliance with them. Check with your state law requirements for insured clients who cannot afford services. That's where, like, if you offer self-pay, some states you can't do that. Some states may have a policy that you could, but it has to be like within X amount of dollars and blah, 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 blah. This is just me reinforcing, like, have office policies. I think ours are like 13 pages long, but that was just because of a lot of experience and many situations that happened, that now we have office policies that pretty much umbrella anything that could possibly happen. So if it does happen, we can say, right here in our office policies, you signed off on them on your first session. Would you like to review them again? If this happens, like if this situation happens again, unfortunately, we may have to consider other options for treatment. So have really, really great office policies. It will cover all of these expectations. Have someone help you with them, have someone who has experience help you with them, who has maybe either created them or knows some law around it. The other considerations for your office policies and documentation, informed consent is absolutely necessary. Before that client comes in and you start asking assessment questions, they need to have informed consent. If not, you are out of compliance. It's actually not super kosher to be seeing them, and you could get in a lot of hairy situations. And the same, like, make sure you have HIPAA, like a HIPAA document. There is a standard generic HIPAA document that the NASW has, and the same with informed consent. They have like a general standard one that you can just form to your practice or just adopt. The expectations should all be on there, and also check with your legal counsel and the NASW on what any other things that need to be included in your. When COVID first started, we had to do telemental health consents. I don't think that's as much as a thing anymore, as long as you include like some electronic stuff in there, but just make sure you check, because there are changes and caveats to the consents that people are signing. Again, check with your state and local laws all the time, and have a business plan. Those are probably the two biggest takeaways that I would tell anyone who wants to start a private practice, and utilize the NASW. They do have resources for private practice, so utilize them. They are super awesome, and they will advocate for you. They will advocate for the client, but they will also advocate for you, knowing that you're working in the best interest of your client. So if a client is doing something pretty egregious, they will advocate on your behalf. So, okay, I think that is pretty much it. Oh, I have a plug for our study. I don't know if I was allowed to do this, but Jessica told me to put it on here. We also have an MSW study happening for neuroscience. So if anyone's interested, here's the QR code. Here's all of the things, and you'll start to see these flyers around too. I wanted to open up to questions, because I know this is a lot of information and it's pretty heavy information. It kind of is stressful information. So any questions you have about private practice, thinking about starting a practice, all of the things. Yeah.
How do you balance the business side with like still being a practitioner? I guess with you also being like a student.
There's many hats, yes. I think it is knowing where your boundaries are really helpful. So like the reason our office policies are like 13 pages long is because I think for some of my therapists that work at the practice, I wouldn't say all of them, but for some of them, it's really hard to set boundaries, and it's really hard to have like, here is where my practice hat comes on, and here is where like me as somebody who is in private practice has to set some pretty stern limits. So knowing those boundaries and being able to communicate that to your client and letting them know, like, the purpose of this is me working in your best interest. The purpose of this is so that way we can have a therapeutic relationship that's beneficial to you. And part of that is me also addressing some of this other stuff on the back end. I rarely have had clients who have ever like been upset that I have set a boundary with them or said like, you owe, like, hey, let's talk about your bill. Your bill's like, it's getting out there. So like, let's talk about either a payment plan or like how we can work on this, because I want to address like the underlying issues, not this bill that is looming. So yes, I think it's just those boundaries. And like I said, establishing that with your client early on is really, really helpful. And like I said, I rarely have had a client who has said anything. So some folks don't like your boundaries, like it is what it is. It keeps you also in your spaces as well. So I will say I'm also very outspoken and direct at times. So I mean, I don't know if that helps, but I don't know, maybe it's a hindrance, but did that answer your question? Okay. Yeah.
If you could share a little bit about your path to starting a private practice, like why you decided to do that, and also if you think in the end it's worth it given everything you have to juggle.
Oh yeah, so I actually never wanted to own a private practice. How I ended up here, I was in a private practice at the time. So I've worked inpatient, and I worked in home, and I worked at a clinic setting. I also did a bunch of like other stuff like international work and things like that. And then I moved to a private practice for a few years. What had happened is I had met my business partner, who is a massage therapist, and we were discussing like our practices. I was focusing in trauma at the time. That's when like the neurobiology of trauma was becoming really like, it wasn't big yet. It was still not super big. There was a lot of pushback in social work. Social work really likes to push back on the neuroscience, just FYI. But there was a little bit of pushback, but I was practicing the interventions, like somatic interventions for neurobiology and other things. So I was talking to the massage therapist and he was like, hey, when I do certain releases, I get these huge emotional responses. I was like, hey, did you know this is why this happens? And I'm like, it's really hard to get clients to go to the somatic side of things or the bodywork side of things because it's really not integrated. He's like, yeah, I can't get my clients into therapy. So this conversation was like, maybe we should open our own. And then 2 years later, we opened our own practice where we had both of them. Is it worth it? I would say that's difficult because I think it depends on where you put your worth. I would say that we have done really amazing things at the practice that for me, I'm very proud that we have been able to accomplish those things, especially with clients. We are also very community oriented. So like we have a green space. We have a lot of community partnerships that we work with. We also help with planting, with a bunch of like donations for like our green spaces. We have workshops that we can offer for free for our clients. So like we've done some really awesome stuff and had really great community partnerships. So all of that to me has been really amazing. And opportunities that like I'm really happy as a social worker I was able to have by owning the practice. I would say that the back end of things, like all of this stuff definitely seems very overwhelming, which is why I say just make sure you have a team, like you have people who support you. It makes it way less overwhelming. And also people who have experienced this, like your attorney has experienced a plethora of things. They are an attorney, so they are always in court doing things. Well, hopefully not always in court, but like their job is to keep you out of court. But like doing things, so like they are super awesome and also very reassuring at times. Like, hey, this is gonna pass. Like it's just really stressful right now. Like give it some time, it'll blow over. Like they're really helpful at also kind of giving you a thermometer. Like this is something to worry about. That one isn't. I don't know why you're stressing so much about it. So that's kind of what I'd say. I'm really happy that I have the people in place that have been with us since the start. Does that all answer your question? Yeah. Okay. And I think too, as a student, so my passion was always to go back to get my PhD. So, I mean, it's just a balancing of time, commitment, and also be a very good delegator of responsibility. Very good delegator. Know people's roles and delegate and trust them. Make sure you have staff that you trust. So that helps a lot. I trust my admin staff is phenomenal.
We are over time though, so if anyone has any questions, I know folks have class, so feel free.
Were there any questions in the chat?
Okay.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah, thank you all for coming. Sorry, that was a bit overwhelming, and sorry this room is so warm. It is very warm. And I don't, like I said, and we're talking about like heavy stuff that's like, whew. So
Thank you so much.
yeah. Enjoy the season. So, and also if you're interested in doing the survey, please